Hello, I'm Katie Steele, Southwest Climate Hub Coordinator and Director of the ARID Project at New Mexico State University.
And I'm Tanya Burnett, the Education and Outreach Specialist at the National Drought Mitigation Center in Lincoln, Nebraska.
And I'm Julie Elliott, here today to walk you through the current GrassCast maps for the Great Plains. I recently retired from the Natural Resources Conservation Service as a rangeland management specialist.
There's a whole bunch of collaborators that make GrassCast possible, and the slide you can see is a quick tour of their logos.
We're going to discuss the GrassCast forecast for the Southern Great Plains. Just a reminder, GrassCast is a tool that gives you forage forecasts for the growing season. And when you go to the tool, you'll see 3 maps. Each map considers a different weather pattern for the growing season. Julie will be explaining how to best pick which map works for your location. But first, Katie will give a quick overview of the long lead weather forecast for the Southern Great Plains.
Thanks, Tanya. To find the seasonal outlooks for temperature and precipitation, just Google 3-month seasonal outlooks in National Weather Service, and the top results should take you right to the 3-month outlook page. So let's take a look at precipitation first of all for the Southern Plains region. So looking at this outlook, we can see that pretty much the whole area is in the zone of equal chances. And what this means is that we don't really know if you're going to get above average or below average precipitation for the upcoming growing season. The 1-month outlook, if you're interested, looks pretty much the same. So if we look at the temperature, however, we're finding that the region is indicating a probability of above normal temperatures. So this probability is actually higher in the south of the region, up to about 50 to 60%, with decreasing probability as you head further north. So it's going to be a warm growing season, that's for sure, warmer than usual, and we don't really know about what's going to happen with the precipitation at this point. These outlooks will be updated by July 15th, so it's well worth checking in.
Thank you, Katie. Before we get started, I just want to invite those of you who are new to GrassCast to please see our June 16th video on the Southwest Climate Hub YouTube channel, where we went into a lot more details about GrassCast and how to use it and how the maps are made. Before we dive in, those in eastern New Mexico will want to consider what type of growing season they have. Do you have a continuous growing season that runs from spring until fall? Or do you have 2 distinct growing seasons, a spring and a summer, with virtually no overlap between the spring grasses and the summer grasses? If your growing season is continuous, then this is your video. If you have 2 distinct growing seasons, then you'll want to see the Southwest video, which you can find again on the Southwest Climate Hub YouTube channel.
How have the summer growing season conditions been so far in the Southern Plains?
Well, last fall, winter and early spring put most of the area into a huge deficit that most of us thought we would never crawl out of. But a good May and early June really turned soil moisture conditions around. So except for southeast New Mexico and southwest Texas, in the GrassCast area, most of the area has been steadily climbing out of the deficit country. These are cumulative precipitation maps from October 1st to May 30th. On the left, June 12th in the middle, and June 26th here on the right. The colors indicate percent difference between this year and the long-term average of 1980 to 2022. A deep red means the area is 50% or less of the long-term average precipitation, while deep green indicates the area has received 100% or more of the long-term average. Near average precipitation is actually indicated by the yellow color. The gray areas are places where GrassCast just doesn't work very well, so no forecasts are made, rather than make a map that has such low confidence that you could throw dice and come up with just as good of an idea. If we look at just the growing season precipitation, we can see there's a whole lot more green than the previous picture. And that's simply because the accumulated deficit from fall and winter is ignored. Except for the far southwestern and southeastern part of the Southern Plains GrassCast area, The areas have received excessive moisture compared to the long-term average, and that steadily expanded as we go from May 30th across to June 26th. Even Kansas, which has had deep-seated drought, has seen some improvement from the moisture received aspect.
So I'm anticipating that GrassCast is going to look pretty optimistic over the Southern Plains. Is that right?
It does, with just a few notable exceptions. Here are all three maps side by side, with above average precipitation here on the left, near average in the middle, and below average on the right. This is from now through the end of the growing season. GrassCast predicts a lot of growth out there. Now remember, GrassCast doesn't know what kind of grasses are on any particular piece of ground, nor does the model know how good the management has been, or if the moisture is soaked in, or if it ran off. It does know the infiltration rate of soils, so it can discount torrential rains, but it can't know if the soil and vegetation were in the proper condition to capture this moisture.
Julie, is it possible to take a look at each of the three scenarios separately? Then we don't have to process so much information at one time.
Very good idea, Tanya. There's a lot of information, a lot of colors here to try and get through. All right, let's just look at the above average precipitation outlook. Now, just a reminder, we're looking at percent difference in total production compared to the long-term average. So deep blue indicates 30% or more total production than the long-term average, while a deep red would indicate 30% or less total production than the long-term average. Green, shown here, is near normal production. So most everyone looks pretty good, with just a few limited areas in the Southwest, Texas Panhandle, Southeast New Mexico, and Southern Kansas expecting 5 to 15% less production than the long-term average, indicated by these yellow colors. The deep drought conditions in mid-northern Kansas preclude any possibility of near normal production, even with above normal precipitation for the rest of the growing season. The deficit is just too big, and we're too far into the growing season to recover lost production. But most of the rest of the Southern Plains looking pretty optimistic.
So Julie, this is anticipating if we are going to get above normal precipitation. Does the Southern Plains manage to hold on to that optimistic outlook if we go to look at near average precipitation?
Well, Kitty, for the most part, with, again, some significant exceptions, it does. Southeast New Mexico, the southern end of Texas, and a limited area at the southeast base of the Panhandle of Oklahoma, and the Texas area here, face some significant expected losses of 15 to 30% less total production than the long-term average. There are a few more spots of 5 to 15% less production than average that show up as indicated by the yellow, even with near normal average precipitation for the rest of the growing season. Our north central Kansas friends can see that the expected losses in their area expand rapidly and significantly, but I don't think any of them would be surprised by that forecast.
Do we hold on to that optimism even with below average precipitation for the rest of the growing season?
For most of Colorado and western Kansas, yes. As well as in the Texas Panhandle and northeast New Mexico. But the areas of expected losses in production expand significantly in southwest New Mexico. And there's an arc in Texas that connects those two isolated areas that we noted in the near average precipitation forecast. Oklahoma also sees more country that could find themselves in that 5 to 15% less production than the long-term average. Now, just a quick reminder, GrassCast is forecasting total production, not grazable production. So when a loss is expected, the grazable production loss will be significantly more than the total production loss. When an excess is expected, one needs to consider if that excess will be made up of grass species that are tasty to animals and when they are tasty. For example, for my area, just outside of the map that I'm showing here, we're in the blue. But much of that production is going to be made up of cheatgrass, needle grasses, western wheatgrass, because last year was the driest year in 135 years. None of those grasses that I mentioned, cheatgrass, the early season, cool season grasses, are tasty on the tasty scale for livestock now. The summer grasses, which took the brunt of the drought last year, they're not going to set any production records this year.
Thanks, Julie. It's really very useful to know how important it is that we're able to interpret the forage on our own landscape in order for GrassCast to be useful. Another thing to consider is Julie's previous explanation on grazable losses versus production losses, and you can find that in the previous video in this series that was recorded on June 16th. So if you need to find out more about GrassCast too, just go to grasscast.unl.edu, or you could just type GrassCast into your favorite search engine to find the website. On the website, you can access the zoomable feature that lets you see more specific information for your particular area, including how much precipitation has been received and is expected for each of the 3 scenarios. And then hopefully you can consult these 3 scenarios and decide which works best for your location. There are also several videos and tutorials that can help you interpret the maps. So once again, thanks, Julie, for helping us understand what's happening with GrassCast over the Southern Plains this season.
Yes, thank you, Julie. And don't forget that GrassCast will be updated again in 2 weeks.
Thank you all for having me.
Bye.
Bye.